Today, we're going to be taking a look at how we can utilize memory techniques to learn things like data science, computer programming, statistics, and different types of things like that. So I have the privilege of being joined by my friend, Dr. Anthony Metivier, who has taught a number of students memory techniques in order to do things like learn up languages in just a matter of weeks, or learning complex mathematical formulas within a matter of minutes. So it'll be really interesting to see how we can apply these skills to make learning easier. Now, what this video doesn't really cover is some of the specific things that you will want to learn for learning each of these types of topics. One of the things that we discussed is that figuring out what you actually need to learn is one of the most important parts of an effective learning strategy. Now, that's going to depend a lot on your type of background and what your actual objectives are. For example, for me to learn a new programming language is going to be a different strategy than for me to, say, teach my kids programming. Or for if you're, say, a professional working to transition your career into more advanced analytics, data science, is going to be a different strategy than if you were, say, still a student. If you're coming from a background where you're maybe managing teams and you want to be able to communicate with data scientists and programmers and different things like that, it's going to be a different strategy than if you were, say, actually a practitioner. So picking the right type of strategy and the right kind of path for what you want to do is a really, really important aspect of this whole learning journey. And it's something that I plan to break down in a number of other videos, because I often get the question, what should I study? How should I approach this? And the answer is it really depends on where you're starting from and where you're trying to get to. Now, if you haven't already, if you'd like to subscribe and hit the notification icon, then you'll see as soon as those videos come out. If those videos are out already, there will be some links in the description below where you can check those all out. Now, I gotta be honest, I was a little bit perhaps skeptical in a way about how memory techniques could maybe be used for some of these different areas, because I haven't used memory techniques myself for learning a lot of these skills, but after going through and having a chat with Anthony about these different techniques, I can definitely see how some of these skills could definitely augment the whole learning process. And I definitely wish I had some of these skills available when I was studying for certain exams. And I think even now I will be applying some of these skills that I've even learned through this video to learning up, especially different symbols, new terminologies and everything like that. Because whenever we get into these different fields, data science is the combination of statistics, mathematics, computer science, and some domain level knowledge and expertise. And all of these, each of these has a lot of its own language that can be a lot to learn. And so having somebody who is an expert at learning up different languages and has taught other people to do the same is definitely interesting to have a chat to. So during this video, I'm going to be seeing how Anthony would approach memorizing this formula right here. Now, for those of you who are familiar with statistics, this is the correlation coefficient of a population. Now, why would you want to learn something like this when these days you could really just use a 3-letter function in R to do this calculation for you? Well, I think there's a few key reasons. First of all, if you're doing some sort of certification exam, you basically need to remember these formulas. Now, even if you're not studying anymore, one of the nice things about mathematical formulas is that they're an extremely nice way of concisely representing quite a lot of information. And once you have a formula, you can actually kind of see the relationships between different variables and kind of manipulate them and play around with them to be able to make the function do different things for you. Once you get an understanding of this particular formula, you'll actually have understood quite a few different concepts in statistics. Now, Anthony doesn't actually have any background in data science or statistics. So what I find really interesting about the way he goes and breaks down this formula is that he basically goes through and converts these symbols, which are effectively meaningless to him at the moment, and converting them into some human kind of imagery, which kind of forms a more efficient index that different ideas and concepts and definitions can be attached to in order for better recall. This effectively reduces the cognitive load necessary to remember these terms in the future.
If you're new to this channel and you're keen to learn the latest tips, tricks, and tools for working more effectively with data, please hit the subscribe button for weekly videos. Dr. Anthony Metivier, it is fantastic to see you today. And I thought this would be, yeah, I thought this would be a great conversation to have. So for those who don't know you, you are a memory expert and a bit of an entrepreneur and everything as well. Got a great course online on personal branding as well as memory techniques and learning techniques. So one of the things I guess we wanted to take a bit of a look into today and to see if we could help people is to take a look at how we can use different learning and memory techniques in order to learn technical skills like programming and data science and that sort of thing.
Yeah, it's something I get asked about a lot. And you introduced me as a memory expert, and I certainly wouldn't deny that, and I've become that. But I started just as a memory enthusiast, and my goal is to make people experts over their own memory, right? Because that's ultimately what if you just learn how your memory really, really works, then your brain doesn't really care about the information. Your ego might, but your brain doesn't, and the techniques don't care, and the information doesn't care, because as you know, as a data specialist, information is just inert, so to speak. It has energy, yes, but it needs certain shaping and so on. So there's an old saying that, take or a bucket, the ocean doesn't care. And it's the same thing with memory. If you just have the right tools, and you have the tools that accommodate the task that you want, such as, a bucket or a spoonful of the ocean of information, you really don't have the limits that it seems like you have, so long as you bring the right tool to the ocean. So that's what I like to help people do, is be prepared to be able to get as much of that ocean of information as they want into their minds. The question is, do they need what they want? Or can we get them to focus on what they need, which is part of being an expert over your own mind, is focusing on what you need, not necessarily what you may be in conflict.
Right. Okay. Because, there are actually a lot of different techniques and tools available to actually learn and memorize stuff, isn't there?
Yes.
So, often people use the term mnemonics and everything like that. And sometimes we think of little things like imagining different imagery and different things like that. But I think you teach a number of techniques which are kind of, I would say, probably next level kind of mnemonics kind of techniques and everything. So
right. They're certainly robust. They're more robust than the average memory training. And there's a reason for that. And that's because a lot of the memory training in the 20th century and now the 21st century comes from memory competitors. And they're not really focused on real everyday life situations. They memorize volumes of information at different capacities in order to win prizes. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's actually pretty amazing, and we learn a lot from it. But it doesn't translate as directly to how am I going to get a raise at work, right? Because I want to be the person who works the fastest, the most efficiently, the most accurately, and am able to connect the dots at a higher level than the other person in my organization. And you go from just raw semantic information to expertise, to knowledge. And real knowledge is the production of new ideas, because you're able, almost like a rhizome, those plants that they're decentralized, so to speak, rather than a tree that has this sort of root structure. You can be both the tree with a solid root structure, but also just have these amazing new ideas that are decentralized, and then you become more of an innovator and you're able to compete better in your profession. So
Right.
that's what we focus on.
Okay. No, that's interesting. And I was having a look at a few of your YouTube videos on your YouTube channel as well, which
Okay.
is a great resource for anybody who wants to check that out. So there was some really interesting ideas on there that you have actually. So I was watching one of your videos on certain, I think it was memory myths or kind of, um, and so there were a few concepts that you're talking about there. For instance, the idea that you don't necessarily need to understand all the concepts before you memorize certain things sometimes. Um, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on that a little bit more.
Yes, yes. So this is one of the problems with memory competitors teaching memory for learning.
Yep.
I've heard it so many names because they're really good people, and
Yep.
forgive them, Father, they know not what they do, kind of thing. But some very accomplished memory competitors have said, do not memorize things you don't understand.
Right.
This is nonsense. This is absolute not good advice. It's very bad advice. And the reason is, and I know this, I've got a PhD, I've got 2 MAs, I've got a BA, I've got certificates in a couple of areas like hypnotherapy and neuro-linguistic programming. I've even got a certificate in how to serve alcohol, right? And I can right now that you can learn so much more faster if you just commit things to memory and then think about them in your memory to make those connections that we just talked about that decentralize the knowledge so that you can have this kind of epiphany-like structure, aha moments, right? But if you're like, well, I'm not going to commit this to memory because I don't understand it, you will lock yourself potentially forever out of that information or just make it a lot harder to learn it. So for example, I'm studying a very ancient philosophy called Advaita Vedanta, and it is a mind warp. I never would have understood what I've come to understand out of it if I sat around trying to understand it. I just memorized, both in Sanskrit and in English, what they say, and then I was able to percolate, make the connections almost subconsciously or unconsciously, and then I'm reading, continuing to read, and it's like, aha! Now, that's my current sort of learning project, but that's what I did when I was in university, and I was studying philosophy, studying languages, I studied history of science, history of technology, and so forth. I didn't sit around waiting to understand things. I just plowed through text, memorized things, regardless of whether I understood it or not, terms, architectonic tautology. I still am learning new things about architectonic tautology, but you won't catch a real student waiting around to memorize stuff. You memorize so that you might understand, not wait until you understand to memorize. It makes zero sense, and it's really bad advice. But the better advice is memorize. Same thing in language learning. Just memorize, and then you'll make so many connections. There's so many words that mean different things. If you would just memorize one of those things, it becomes the platform of all the other, or a sufficient number of the other definitions will come into play. And if you're honest and ethical about what your own journey as a language learner is, you don't even know the half, not even a tenth of your tongue. And if you would just memorize a few things of what different words could mean, you'll open up so many pathways and gateways. Just understand as you go and memorize as quickly as you can. That's my philosophy, and it works.
Okay, no, that's interesting. Would you say that even works for things like mathematical formulas and different things like that, or because
yeah, I will, and
yeah.
you don't have to take my word for it, because Robert Adut, who has Yay Math, he's quite a prominent figure. I mean, maybe not viral because it's math and this very concentrated focus, but years ago, he created some videos for my course on memorizing math. He memorized 9 formulas very, very quickly. The thing that he said is, wow, by memorizing these formulas, not only do I know them, when I'm teaching, I don't have to refer to the textbook, I can just write them on the board, but these connections start to see parallels and so forth, because it's in my mind. It becomes part of you. It literally becomes part of you, because all your memory is stored in chemicals. In the same way that information is stored in, positive and negative charges in computers, it's no different, positive and negative ions in the brain. So yeah, again, it's that principle. Your brain doesn't care what the information is. Only your ego gets in the way. So if you would just memorize, you will have that understanding, whatever it may be.
Okay.
Do you want to memorize it, or do you actually need to memorize it in order to make rapid advancements forward? That's what we always need to keep in mind.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question, Nat, because I guess the other thing is what are the things that are really worth memorizing these days as well? Because we can look up so many things via the internet, and you've got Google and everything, and
Yeah.
so what are the things that are really worth focusing on, especially in the area of tech. I find there's a lot of things that change very frequently. So libraries get updated, languages get updated, and there's a lot of reading of just what the basically what the latest updates are. There are certain things that don't change, like some of the sort of underlying principles of certain things. And so if you kind of go back to the original formulas and everything like that, then effectively you could work out everything from that. And those are probably the more difficult things to remember. So for instance, if you're working out the formula for correlation, well, these days you could just call a function called COR, like core, to figure out the correlation for that. But remembering the sort of formula for that is perhaps a little bit more difficult. Before we talked today, I was kind of going over. So, I mean, just to give you a little bit of background of myself as well. So, I teach a lot of R programming to different students. And one of the ways that I kind of managed to effectively kind of get into data science actually was basically the fact that I had the opportunity to work with statisticians. And I came from more of a programming and information systems, business intelligence sort of background myself. And I had the opportunity to work with various statisticians. And so because data science is becoming more, is very much about statistics, but it's got a lot of programming as well. So I managed to help these statisticians improve their code. And at the same time, I was learning statistics from them. But statistics is not my own, it's not my background myself. So it's one of the things that I definitely want to work on improving, because I know it's really important. And I know it enough to teach, well, non-statisticians. But, keeping up with the conversations with statisticians can sometimes be a little bit more of a challenge sometimes. And
well, just as a simple example, I didn't catch everything you were just saying, but as you were saying things, I get a particular process going. So R and core, right? And it's just in my mind, I'm starting to build a little set of associations. And so if I was reading a book on statistics and I came up on terms like R and, I can just search for core and that's going to bring up a certain formula, then I'm going to think of R that's equal to make the apple core exposed or whatever. And then maybe you say another thing and you're talking about statisticians. So now I'm going to have this graph bursting out of the apple core, right? And, as you go and say more things, I can just compound on to this little mystical imagery that I'm making in my mind. And I'm paying total attention to you, not distracting myself or anything. In fact, I'm paying more attention to you because I'm encoding in my mind what it is you're saying. You can do that while you're reading. You can do that while you're taking a video course. And this is the way that learners who are really good tend to operate anyway. They just aren't necessarily aware of them doing it. So you can just become aware and then actually be more strategic about it so that, we meet in a year or whatever, and I'll be like, hey, how's things going with, R and working with statisticians? Did you ever memorize that full formula for core? I don't remember what the whole thing was. It had something to do with COR, and it would populate, whatever it is that you would need.
So I was having a little bit of a browse actually, and I was just looking up different formulas. And so I wrote down the formula for correlation, the correlation coefficient here actually. And I'm not too sure if you can see that all right. And so after I read this, I kind of thought, oh, right. Okay, yeah, that kind of makes sense. I probably learned this quite a few years ago when I was doing when I was studying for a CFA. But at the same time, I realized that somewhere along the lines in the last 7 years or so, I kind of forgot this formula. And looking back at it now, it's like, okay, well, I can kind of understand what's going on, which is still kind of useful. But if I was learning that from scratch, which I would have at some point in time, how would you actually like understand, like, okay, well, what are all these different symbols and everything like that? Could you remember it without necessarily remembering what all these symbols and everything are?
Right. So there's a couple of ways to approach it, but if it's correlation and coefficient, right? I don't understand what any of that means, but now I know that that's what you're talking about.
Right.
I didn't quite catch what it was because I was focusing on the core thing, but if it's correlation and coefficient and so forth, then those things, whether I understand them or not, we can just start to have them as words, right?
Right.
So I saw that there was something like COR and then an equal sign.
Yes.
So look, let's be realistic here. You're not going to flash a code like that at any memory competitor, and they're just going to be like, yeah, core equals, X over 5, 3, 2, 1, and then some symbol I've never seen before with it's like a Greek, Z or something. Like, very few people are going to do that. However, if I have that actual, probably nobody is going to do that, not even an eidetic, which means something like photographic memory, which actually doesn't exist. But if I was able to study that for a while, or Robert Adut, who in my training shows how he did 9 formulas that look like that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to have that same Apple core. And because I know that there's an equal sign, or at least I seem to have seen an equal sign next to COR, I'm going to have something like an Apple core. And then I'm going to have my guy that I use for equal signs when I need it, which is pretty rare, but when I need it. And it's per pound with 2 machine guns. Right? This is going to be in a memory palace. So a memory palace is basically a mental representation of a room or a home or a sidewalk, or, there's different ways to do this. And I'm going to map out in the exact linear formation of that formula, an Apple core in this case. It might be the band, the cores. You've got lots and lots of options, right? It could be Corey Hart. But whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to have something for COR, and I'm going to remember, what was it, correlation and coefficient?
Yes, that's right.
So I'm going to think something about those things, whether I understand them or not, right? I mean, in an ideal world, you already understand something about those things. But I'm going to have that there, and I'm going to then have something that says the equal sign. And then whatever comes after that, I'm going to work with it. So, I've been on live streams and people have thrown formulas that were a little less complex than that. And, I just, on the fly, when they're a little less complex and I understand the symbols, if it's a times symbol, I'll just have like Jesus throwing a cross. Or I might have the monkeys from Space Odyssey, and instead of the bone flying up, it's a cross, like 2 bones making a cross. And then you can have that sort of symbol. The question that I always have in my mind is, when does that become useful to have that much symbols in a formula memorized? But I can tell you that no matter what, even if you have a division line, right? You could just imagine in your memory palace the old Donkey Kong platform, and above and below, right? And so something will be happening above and something will be happening below, and you just sort of mentally project in your memory palace a Donkey Kong screen, and just zoom in on that one little part, so you have that this is above and this is below. Speaking of Donkey Kong, one way that you can really help your mind is, as you are doing this in your mind, you can draw it out on a page. So this is a Chinese word, which is yuan dong, which has to do with exercise and fitness and so forth. And so what you can see here is the YouTube symbol, and then the UN building, yuan, and then dong, Donkey Kong. And he's actually got a donkey. I'm not a very good artist, and you don't have to be, but a donkey is Donkey Kong barrels, and he's lifting it for fitness, right? And it's just easy peasy lemon squeezy. You just got to get your head out of ever thinking that this is work, ever thinking that it's tough. Take a spoon or a bucket. Ocean don't care. Just figure it out. And if you study this craft, this art, this science of memory, see just how fun and easy it is. And it's just a matter of being persistent and consistent so that you learn the skills progressively, as you would know, you got where you were by being consistent and making it work, through tapping
that's really interesting. I mean, it's really interesting just to see the imagery that you apply to this, actually. It definitely does make it a lot more visual. Because to be honest, for myself personally, I've never really thought of myself as a very visual kind of person, actually. I mean, when I kind of visualize this formula here, I do have a visualization, but it's really abstract. Um, because I mean, because I know what this kind of looks like as well. I can visualize the scatter plot that this kind of basically relates to. Um, so, and the different kind of patterns that a scatter plot might have. But then, you know, you'd need to, yeah, you'd probably need to know a little bit more about statistics to sort of actually kind of get that in your head. But then that's kind of what I'd kind of link it back to, actually.
So
So
let me just pause on something if you don't mind, because I think this will
yeah,
really help you and your listeners and your viewers. You said scattershot, right?
scatter plot.
Plot, scatter plot. Okay. So okay, I misheard that. I'm actually a little bit, but so scatter plot, right? Well,
Yeah,
instantly I'm seeing William S. Burroughs, who actually used to put buckets of paint in front of a canvas, and he would use a gun. He
right.
called them scatter shot paintings. In any case, I thought that maybe that's how I misheard it. On the note of being visual, it's a big misperception that these memory techniques have anything to do with being visual. And it's our fault as memory teachers because we say, just get an image in your mind, etc. And it's very hard to catch myself because here's something very exciting. I don't have a mind's eye. And only recently, in the last 2 weeks or so, did I start to see anything in my mind. And there's a that they call aphantasia, which is the lack of a mind's eye. I don't believe it's a condition, but nonetheless, I've had a bit of controversy by sort of being skeptical of this. But the reason why I'm skeptical is because I've done well at memory competitions. Lynn Kelly, who's a very good memory competitor, she apparently has no mind's eye. And yet we still are able to use these techniques without seeing pictures in our minds. So how does that work? Well, it's because it's never pictures anyway. It's multi-sensory. So we have a formula in the magnetic memory method world called CAVE COGS, right? Which is kinesthetic, auditory, visual, emotional, conceptual, olfactory, gustatory, and spatial. And for me, the visual is the least of it. This out to help students see what's in my mind, so to speak. Because I'm just thinking about YouTube conceptually. I'm thinking about the size of this little icon, etc., which is the spatial element. I'm thinking about emotions that I have to these things, the UN building. You know, it's very, very important that it's not about seeing in your mind on its own. I don't believe anybody sees anything in their minds because our mind is imagination, right? So you don't have to be visual. You just need to find your style, find how you think, build from your existing competence. And anybody who understands what we're saying right now is extraordinarily competent to understand mental content and then start. And lo and behold, 17, 18 years of practice, one day I'm sitting here and I'm memorizing cards and I get to the 9 of hearts, which is Cobra Commander. And all of a sudden I saw him after years of practice, nearly 2 decades of practice, I see Cobra Commander. And as I told Alec Figuera, who runs Aphantasia Meow, which is overcome aphantasia, I said, you know, I almost wish it never happened because now I am being more visual in my mind and that's interrupting my focus because I want to be with my wife and not thinking about the girl down at the cafe. And now all of a sudden, it's not just thinking about the girl at the cafe. I see her in my head. It's like, get lost. So, you know, be careful what you wish for, and you don't need to be visual in order to use these techniques. It was never needed. And it's just a bit of a flaw in not a flaw, but it's a bit of a feature of we keep using pictures. Other languages that talk about memory techniques, they don't do that. They have other ways of talking about it. So in German, they call it Eselsbrücke, which means donkey bridge, right? And bridge has that kinesthetic, physical, spatial feel to it. Here, that donkey carrying the information you want to memorize over the bridge to your memory, right? It's not a visual thing. It's something more.
Right, right. Okay. No, that's interesting that, yeah, because there's lots of different ways that we can associate things with in our mind, basically, right? And each one of those is perhaps a little bit more individual to ourselves because we have different backgrounds and different associations. And I think that's probably one of the key things with kind of memory techniques, basically, that it is forming, I guess you said, like more bridges, more associations, so that you have easier access to that information. And so actually, perhaps you could tell us a little bit more about the memory palace, actually, because from what I understand of it anyway, basically it's it gives another sort of reference point, which can tie things together. So not just memorizing things, but being able to memorize things in sequence is particularly useful. So I think some of these techniques that you teach would have been extremely useful when I was perhaps studying for certain exams, and I wish I had some of these earlier. But,
Yeah.
yeah, could you tell us a little bit more about the memory palace and how that helps us remember sequences and things like that?
Absolutely, absolutely. So the memory palace, I believe, is the strongest association power that we have. And I believe that it's very difficult to explain exactly how and why all the time. So bear with me, because it's very simple, but it's something that sounds more complicated than it is. But essentially, it's not about a memory palace. That's just a term that we use. Some people call it mind palace. Some people call it the journey method. Some people call it Roman room. Some people call it all kinds of different things, method of loci. And basically what you're doing is you're making space a mnemonic. You're making it a location-based mnemonic so that you have a canvas upon which to build. Or maybe a better metaphor is a theater stage, right? And so you become a sort of theater director and you say, oh, I got to memorize something with coefficients, and it's got to be COR equals and this sort of stuff. And so now we're going to have on our theater stage, which could be the corner of this room, or it might be above your shoulder, Jonathan, that this location-based mnemonic allows me to start to weave together other associations from that Cave-Coggs model, right? And now, when we know we're just talking about a location-based mnemonic, we have in our minds the biggest resource ever, because most of us have lived in more than one home. In those homes, there are more than one room. Most of us been to hotels. Most of us been to cafes, restaurants, churches, movie theaters, museums, etc. Homes of our friends, all the homes of our families, etc. If you just get out a piece of paper, you write down A to Z, and you go, who do I know whose name starts with A? Alan. Who do I know starts with B? And oh, I don't know any B. Go on to C. And you just start to gather this pool of rich associations, businesses, etc. And then you draw squares on a piece of paper to help your mind, if you're not visual like me, and even if you are visual, help your mind craft a journey. And so what I teach people to do is, how do we make the most efficient journeys possible? Memory palaces. I prefer that term, but call it whatever you want. I had an old man who couldn't do this until he came up with his own term, which was apartments with compartments. And then after that, he memorized dozens of poems. He relearned German. He was reading his old love letters with his girlfriend from World War II, and he died happier, and he actually, to this day, in the free worksheets that I give, have his sample of the A to Z memory palaces as an example of just how easy this is. So if an 88-year-old man can do this, anybody can. And speaking of older people, James Gerwing, one of the Magnetic Memory Method students, he won the 2019 Canadian Memory Championships as a retiree. And he had already, over the years, broken a number of Canadian records. So it's not about your age. It's about your willingness to just dive in and figure this out. And I'll be the first to admit that it is something that each person needs to figure out. There's multiple points of entry. It can be confusing because some people call it a memory palace, some people call it a mind palace, et cetera, et cetera. And I sort of am guilty of adding to the confusion, but I always try to make the point that it's not. It's about the fact that we're using location as a higher order mnemonic to weave together our other mnemonics, like guys with machine guns, like apple cores, or the band the cores, or Corey Hart, or whatever we're going to do to get this set of associations together, right? And so it's very, very simple, fun, and it's a journey. It never ends. I've been doing this for so long. I hope to be doing it the rest of my life because it's great. And there's evidence, actually. There's a guy named Tim Dalglish who has done some research into how this can help you get out of depression, how it can help you with anxiety. And it seems to me always that it's lifted my mood. It actually saved my life in grad school. I was so depressed, and I found this stuff, and it never cured my depression, but I felt better. And I think in some of the research I've read, I think it has to do with more dopamine, more myelin, potentially more norepinephrine in the brain. And all of these things are also central development of habit formation. And then, of course, when you're using space, you feel more connected to the world, right? Because you're now switching on this relationship that you have to your external environment. You're no longer alienated. You're no longer in this existential, thrownness or abandoned to just survive like some feral child that has no connection to anything. No, you're now using the world, and you're making the world part of your ability not to survive, but to thrive. So it's really profound. And in the Greek tradition, Thales, who's considered the first philosopher in science, he said megason topos apantagarkori, which means space is ultimate because it contains all things. What your brain except for a chemical bath that is the ultimate organization of space? You're just you, I'm just me, but we contain everything we're ever going to know in the space of our brains. We are everything at some level. We have that beautiful, total, abundant access to whatever we need at a moment's notice, so long as we train.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting, that. And I mean, you've used it for learning actually many languages. I'm not too sure how many languages you actually speak now, but I understand you just.
Neither am I, because the number doesn't matter. There's all kinds of guys who will wave their, proverbial proboscises in the wind about how many languages they speak. I actually am just focusing right now on Sanskrit and Chinese, but I have in the past become very good in German, have experiences with biblical Hebrew and other sorts of languages. If I'm in Spain for a while, I can usually within 3 months or so to speak. But I will make tragic mistakes because my beard used to be quite long. But the last time I was in Spain, I used the wrong word, and then it ended up being a very short beard, and it's been shorter ever since. So it's not about. I'm not so about my laurels. I'm more concerned about what we can help other people do. So we've got Amanda Markham. She learned 200 words in 10 days of Aranta, which is an Aboriginal language. It only has something like 330 words. I should memorize exactly how many words it has, but I imagine it's changing. And most of them start with the letter A, which was, she found the magnetic mirroring method. She actually wrote a big article about how it helped because it's so frustrating with all these words that start with A. She said that she had a 70% boost in the fluency in that language. Next thing you know, she's going to meetings with these people and sharing some of their ceremonies and so forth. There's a guy, Eldon Clem, in Israel. He memorized 1,000 words in ancient Ethiopic in just 6 weeks. And then he went on to read 1,000 pages, which is just incredible, right? So forget about me. Look at what's happening to this community that I serve. They're tremendous things I never could have anticipated was possible. I very much have what's called coaching effect. And I've had it before in my career. Actually, I was a script consultant, a story, as they sometimes call it, or a script doctor. I would never write, a successful screenplay, but I've helped people do much, much better on the market with their movies. And that's what every teacher hopes for, is that your students will be better than you. I've just been blessed and honored that people follow the teaching and make it real for themselves. So, and yeah, if you really want to listen to me speak or sing Sanskrit for, however long, like 75 days now, by all means, I'll throw down. I've gone and competed. I did half as well as a guy named Dave Farrow, who has 2 Guinness World Records. But that stuff I find is dangerous to talk about because it can discourage people. Everyday people use this all the time. James Gerwing, again, his first thing when he was interviewed, my memory isn't better than anybody else's. I won the championships, but it's not any better. It's just trained and used in a particular way. So yeah, it's so much fun and it's so easy, but I'm very cautious about discouraging anyone with really,
Yeah,
this
no,
or
I
that
think
story.
that
We
makes a
want
lot
it
of
to be
sense.
your story.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Sometimes even as a sort of teacher myself, I always struggle with the balance between, well, how technical do you need to go? Because some of these things, sometimes, we're talking about programming and data science, statistics, and all these different types of things. I mean,
Mm.
there's certainly many, many things that I'm still learning myself, and there will always be kind of more to learn. But even with sort of some more entry level sort of things, there's a lot that you can do, right? So as soon as you know how to code and know a few concepts and stuff, then you can start automating things, start making your life easier. It's such a I mean, it's such joy to do, actually, right? It's being able to just kind of practice those skills, and then it's one of those things you can take it as far as you'd like to, really. And
Right.
I imagine the same. It's the same for sort of memory techniques,
Yeah.
and so um, yeah, I think there's a you want to be able to make it accessible for people, and I guess show them. Well, here's the roadmap. Here's okay. Well, if you'd like to get started, here's how you can get going. And even with this, you could probably do something really pretty useful, like whether that's brush up for a language that you for your next holiday, or studying for exams. There's always lots of certification exams when it comes to programming, data science, all those kind of things.
Mm.
There's a lot of technology that's always to learn lots of terminology, and so I think perhaps skills that you've taught to people to learn different languages could be extremely useful for that. I think we're doing some was taking a look at some articles as well about how different people were using memory palaces to basically learn up textbooks and
Yeah.
um, basically here's the 23 principles of making certain programs faster and different things like that. So
Yeah.
I think some of
If
those
you,
could
if
be incredibly useful.
it's so simple if you set yourself up with the fundamentals. Because if you were a textbook and I wanted to track my way back to scatter plot and to correlation and coefficient and core equals x for r to deal with statisticians, all I need to do is have these skills. Let me know if I got anything wrong there. But all I need to do as I'm reading is have a memory palace in place, and then I can just track my path back. And then I ask myself questions, like, well, what is correlation and coefficiency anyway, and what is R? And then, I can go and look, and now I have this field that I've started to plot out. And if it was scatter plot, I can now start to think of these other sort of diagrams around it, what R, how that connects to coefficients, and all these things that we've talked about. It's the same thing if you read a textbook. But you need to then go and ask yourself questions in your mind. What were those things? And then start to expand so that you're able to have more and more connections. Because the more you know, the more
Yes.
you can know. It's very important.
I mean, just to give a little bit more reference, let me just draw a quick scatter plot here. So you've got, actually, I can't see that right now, but okay. So don't know how well
Okay.
you can actually see that, but that's basically a scatter plot. You've got X and Y axes on here, and you've got lots of dots. That's basically what a scatter plot looks like. And then you've
Right.
got this line, which kind of roughly goes through all the dots. And that line either kind of points kind of up or down or kind of in different directions. And the slope of that line, that's what the correlation coefficient is. So it's a number between 1 and -1. And it just, I mean, what's the useful thing to remember? It basically shows you how well things are related to each other. So if X and Y are perfectly sort of correlated with each other, related to each other, then you'll have a number of 1. And if they're kind of go in completely opposite directions, then you'll have a number of -1. And if they're kind of just randomly related to each other, like there's no relationship, then you're going to have a score close to 0. So that's basically what the correlation coefficient is. And we use that to, see if one factor will be a good predictor of another one, is basically
Right.
what that's used for. So,
Well, anything that you want to memorize, you can memorize. And then if there's numbers involved, like 1 and 0 and so forth, and I think I saw on your diagram there that it was something times 11. You know, if you saw an 11, I don't know if that's what I saw, but if you had an 11, you can have an image for 11.
Right. That's my sort of elongated dot, but there's just a.
Right. I was looking up at that previous formula with the core equals. I thought I saw an 11.
Yeah, it's yeah. I should probably have popped this up on like a little slide or something like that, where it would have been far easier to see than my scribbles on a piece of paper. So sorry about that. But yeah, yeah. That's
anyway, the point is that there's actually a very structured, systematic way to have an image for every number. So if you said 0, I've got an image for 0. If you say 1, I got an image for 1. If you say -1, then I've got an image where I can now just add like a knife sticking into the image for 1. And then if I saw an 11, there's an image for that. There's an image for every digit, every 2-digit from 00 to 99. And so those things come into play. And then when you start to expand and explain how this works, I can now start to bolt on, I call it the principle of compounding, bolt on these different things. And that's assuming that I was learning this topic, which maybe one day I will. At the end of the day, though, what really works is that people, and this is the thing that I can never provide, I can just give ideas on how to make it happen. People need to bring their mission, you know, and they need to know the 80-20 rule and focus on the 20% that gives them the maximum output, so that when they are memorizing, they're memorizing the stuff that really matters. And as we started, dividing themselves from what they think they want and really focusing on what they need to be that best possible professional self that they want to be. And the catch is you don't always get to know, right? But by the same token, there's many professionals like yourself where you could hire your consulting hour or something, and you can give guidance about what that best, 20% to focus on might be. Or, if they're not able to do that, they can go at school, for example, go to the secretary's office, call up the secretary. Hey, can I look at a previous exam? Or get in touch with, there's no end of resources for the person who's open and willing to track them down. And people want to help you if you're a serious student. So it's really just a matter of making a mission for yourself, equipping yourself with the skills, and then take it. I think bucket. Don't care.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, sometimes the biggest part is actually figuring out what to learn in the first place, right? Because I don't know, you probably know this better than I do, but the average language has, I don't know how many different words in it. But to be conversational, you only need to know a sort of relatively small kind of percentage of that, right? And I mean, like you said, if you're studying for exam, probably one of the best things to do is go get the past year exam papers and make sure you learn everything that's necessary to be able to do them, right? Now, I guess once you finish doing exams and you get out into the real world, there aren't so many previous year exams and that sort of things to reference. So I don't know, I personally find myself spending ages just doing tons and tons of research about different approaches for doing different things and solving different problems. Because sometimes the answers come from within the domain, sometimes they come from out. And the other problem that I find a lot of times with basically learning and researching things is that usually a lot of the information, again, with technology, one of the difficulties is that it gets updated so often. So for instance, if you're learning the R programming language, the majority of the training available is the kind of stuff that was taught like 20 years ago. But the more recent stuff is, there's a lot less of it, right? So maybe 90% of the information is 20-year-old information, and maybe 10% of the information is sort of the newer information, which is going to help you do stuff faster. Right. So that's probably one of the challenges and stuff as well.
Well, all the more reason for people to be subscribed to your channel and the work that you do and your website and so forth, so that they have someone who cares about this information and who is keeping up to date. And community is a big part of memory, right? We don't have to know it all on our own. There's a guy named Larry, and I often refer to it, who came to me, he wanted to be a doctor in this case. And he said, how do you deal with this when there are zillions of facts?
Yeah.
Well, come on now. Which individual on the planet has ever had to deal with zillions of facts? And yet there are many, many very, very good doctors, right? So I did some research on this. Turns out that actually, and people have done research on this, so I was reading their research, it's around 1 million data points that the average medical professional who's a doctor would have to deal with, but never on their own. Because real doctors are part of communities of doctors and other professionals that support doctors in a hierarchy of, quite a complex ecosystem. And so then you really see that about each doctor is responsible for maybe 100,000 data points, right? And they certainly don't have random access to even all of that at any given point. They have reference manuals. They have things like reflection, further research, and so forth. And the really good doctors, the ones that you hear about that are in demand, are the ones who actually take time with patients, etc. Why might they take time with patients? Because they've got a larger field in their head in the first place, so that they craft their lives in such a way that they're able to have practices that are honest and ethical and outward directed and patient oriented, etc., etc. And so people who are in a scarcity mindset and are scrambling around, exaggerating with zillions of facts, no, this is a recipe for a disaster. What you need to do is find where you are right now, be honest about it, chart out a path to get one step better. And if you base things on your existing competence, and then you have a realistic path to the next step, you can get there so fast it'll make your head spin in a good way, of course. And then you can accomplish so much more. But you need to have a community around you. You need to be able to know what resources you can rely on. And we have to forgive the testing systems out there. Again, it's like they know not what they do. But at the same time, people do pass them. And they have a variety of ways that they do it. Some of those ways are better than others. And you just need to ask yourself, what am I willing to do? And do I really want this? Have a vision for your life. And then when you have your vision, figure out the missions and just start where you are and go to the next thing. And you can do it. Anybody can. I just can't accept that there's anybody who isn't capable of doing that.
I think that makes a lot of sense, and I think that's really, really good advice actually, because these days there is just so much information. When you take an area like data science, it's supposed to be the sort of melting pot between computer science and statistics, and business analytics, and all these different things, and these are all specializations in themselves. And so it's become a topic which is very, very, very wide. And I think the danger can be sometimes is that you try and learn every single thing there is. And then a lot of those things are just not going to be relevant to the specific type of thing that you're doing. So I guess it's the same case like you mentioned with the doctors. There's going to be doctors that specialize in one thing, and there's going to be doctors that specialize in another thing. And I think what we'll start to see over time is that a lot of these sort of data science certifications and roles and stuff will start to split out into more specializations where people can actually focus on, a few things that they can do that are going to make a difference. And then sometimes I still think there's a huge value in being able to memorize certain things, just because we are working with so many different types of people these days that it's useful just to be able to talk to them in their lingo, and to be able to kind of keep up with some of the conversations. Like I said, my background wasn't particularly statistics at all. So I had to learn a lot from the statisticians. And, I think sometimes you almost have to go, you know what, I don't know what that is. I don't know what you're talking about. Could you please tell me, right? Because, I'm sure that's common language in your sort of field of expertise, but I have no idea what you're talking about. And it's really about just, I guess, dropping the ego sometimes and going, okay, yeah, I don't know. Could you please tell me?
Yeah, well, it's exactly right, and just for the sake of time, I should have asked you, but I didn't, what is this scatter plot, display? And that would have been a good strategy. But it just so happened that this is the whole point that I had before. I don't know what those terms meant, right? Correlation and coefficient, but because I memorized them, and then you show me that drawing later, right? Now it's making it make sense. But if you had shown me that diagram and I didn't have those terms already more or less in my memory, then I would have had to juggle new terms and a visual display at the same time, right? So had I asked you to explain it, and you were very kind to offer it, but if I'd had it in my toolbox at that moment off an interview and had said, hey, could you just explain to me what that is? And I'd memorized those two terms, well then it's exactly the principle that we talked about, is that I now have space upon which that diagram can rest that expands my understanding of what those terms are, even though I had done no reading on them or anything like this. And so everybody should learn that the value here is that there are things worth memorizing, and you don't have to understand them first, because they can become the basis, the platform that allows you to have space for understanding to rest.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because it takes time to understand stuff, right? And I guess there's a lot more that goes behind it. And yeah, I guess you just need to, like you said, build up that kind of vocabulary over time. And yeah, I guess by memorizing the different bits, you have, I guess, more material to work with, right?
Yeah. Absolutely. And again, it's that principle. The more you learn, the more you can learn.
After our main conversation, Anthony and I went back to revisit the breakdown of the population correlation coefficient formula. Anthony shares a few more cues to memorize the meaning of different symbols and their sequence within a formula. Statistic formulas use a number of letters and Greek symbols to represent key elements such as the number of observations, mean, or standard deviation of a population. There are lots of little nuances, such as the standard deviation of a population has a different symbol than the standard deviation of a sample. So it's these kind of things which I think these techniques could be well adapted to remembering.
But if it was that U symbol, it went by fast. What did you call it?
That's the mean.
The mean, like MEAN.
Yeah, MEAN, which is the statistical way of saying average.
Right. Okay. So, yeah, I just would come up with like an umbrella or something that has a very mean demeanor, something like that. And maybe Calmini would be in there to make it more concrete, right?
Right.
And the reason why I think of an umbrella is because that you see, as I see it on the screen there, it looks a little bit like it's got two sort of stands or something like that.
That's right. It's like a U with an extra leg on it. So it's a bit of a funny one there. But yeah, I mean that's one of the things I kind of wonder about, because when you look at something like this, it does have all these additional symbols and everything like that. So you've got the funny shaped U, which is the mean. And then you've got that funny thing at the bottom, which is the standard deviation.
So which funny thing at the bottom? The O or
the O with the line sticking out the side.
Yeah. Okay. Standard deviation, right?
Yeah. So that thing there, that's the standard deviation.
Right.
So it's just it's got all these kind of funny symbols and everything like that, which I guess, if you're already familiar with statistics, then maybe that's not too bad. But if you're learning that from scratch, I kind of thought, that might be a little bit difficult to do.
From a mnemonic standard, it isn't. So it's standard deviation, right? What's the most obvious thing to use for something that has this? Is a snowman, right? Now, here's the thing that your people should understand, is that why I'm choosing snowman for standard deviation and that symbol is because it's round, but also standard and snowman start with the same letter. And then this can be a carrot stick coming out of its nose, right? And then, why I'm choosing an umbrella for the mean, was it? Is because it just sort of looks that way, but also because it starts with U.
Yep.
Right? And so now mean, Calmini, then, to reassert that, I might want to, and you said mean means the average.
Yes.
Yeah, so then I might want to think about him, having the umbrella on Average Avenue or something like this, right? And he's like swinging or something like this, and then maybe again, it's that Donkey Kong platform. And then maybe what I would have is, as he's swinging, he's going to like knock over the snowman, and of the standard deviation, and the line, the carrot nose, is going to fly out to hit the next thing that I need to memorize. So, and it's good that this is there. And if you punch this in, that's a great idea, because you sometimes do need to go back and correct things, because you will missee certain things, or misread certain things, or mishear certain things. Don't want to chew up all your time with like endless stories of little corrections I've made or helped people make over the years. But I am quite deaf in this ear, and I will sometimes hear names like Graham as William. And so I'll then have to change the image of William Shakespeare to William Shakespeare with a Graham cracker, and then, figure out how I'm going to remember that it's Graham, not William, because now William has this primacy effect, they call it in memory. So anything that is done can be undone and improved, but this just happens. And it's not about perfectionism. It's about progression towards getting better.
If you'd like to find out more about the work that Anthony does, there's a free memory improvement course that you can sign up for. I've also provided a link to some interesting information on the science of memory improvement. Both links will be available in the description below. If you like this video, please leave a thumbs up. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.